All right, next up for us, we have game boards. For the most part, people make checkerboards, sometimes chessboards, and rarely other games. Most of these are going to be painted with a theme or design in mind. Sometimes we turn them into other things like tables or use other processes like tile setting or clay, even quilting. So let's look at some student examples. A lot of students just use solid colors, and sometimes they put a designer on the outside or focus on the pieces for their creativity. Other students do the pieces decorative, the boxes decorative, even investing in things like glow in the dark paint to add some variety. There's lots of ways to make these things look personal. Another good approach is just to do a picture in front of the checkerboard and make sure that you see enough squares so that you can still play. Some students like to focus on making each square its own little painting. That can be really beautiful and fun to look at. Other people turn the squares into patterns. That makes the board interesting. Sometimes it's fun to do a painting or a collage in the board. And if you remember tints and shades from your foundations class, you can actually take any painting and turn it into a checkerboard by just putting more white in some squares and leaving other colors the natural hue. Likewise, you can do darker shades in the colors and leave some the natural hue. A lot of the themes can be really fun, like this Dr. Seuss board or this seals versus penguins board. One of the things to think about is the board can be very creative and the pieces can be plain, or the pieces can also be very creative. Some students go out and buy and modify their pieces. Other students sculpt them out of clay. Some people collect and bring things that they've collected over the years and turn those into pieces as well. Cut dowels, purchased decorations, sculpted clay. But for the most part in the class, we'll do 3D printed checkers. We'll prototype them using Tinkercad software, and then eventually we'll 3D print those, and we have some choices of colors, so that can be really nice. Some of these examples have a lot of clay because that was before we did our 3D printers. And clay is still an option depending upon how class is going for you. This one's kind of fun. Turn it, pole vaulter turned the pit into the sculpture. Now here we get into looking at the 3D printed checkers. So we'll design our checkers later. A lot of times it's nice to just make the board look sweet. And then once the board is done, we'll use that as inspiration to sculpt our pieces. But you can actually think about them both at the same time if you want to. You could think about maybe you wanted to play cows versus pigs. And then, of course, you're going to need a barnyard for your board. Maybe video games could be your inspiration. Here's a shot of our 3D printer in action. These were made on Tinkercad. We made skulls, and then we went and found crowns, and we put the crowns on top of the skulls. So we have kings. Remember, you don't have to make a checkerboard. It's a game board, technically, so we've had other things besides checkers. We've had dice games and Mancala. So to get started, we're going to do 5 thumbnail sketches. You're going to do 4 small sketches on a piece of office paper, and then color them and try to include 64 squares. The traditional checkerboard is 8 by 8, or a chess set is 8 by 8. So if you do a square and you divide it into 7 spots down the middle and then keep dividing in the middle, 7 lines inside a box gives you 8 by 8 squares. So that's important to get the right amount of squares, and you can kind of color them in. Some people have the squares go all the way to the edge. Another good solution is to give yourself a 2-inch border, and that leaves, I think it's 1.5 inch squares that you can play. Duality can be really fun, like fire versus ice, Vikings versus Packers, penguins versus seals like we saw before. So having a 2-inch border can really give your drawing a spot where you can decorate. Another approach is sometimes people do like a 3 or 4-inch border, and that makes the board smaller, and then the pieces are more like 1 inch. That gives you more room to decorate. In this case, sometimes I wanted to show you how you could just use, I've got darker yellow, darker blue, lighter blue, darker red, lighter red, and by combining those colors, you can make the checkerboard, and then outside of the checkerboard, you can just finish the drawing like you would, or the painting like you normally would. So again, we're using that tints and shades as a way to go. You're not required to do an image, but if you wanted to, that's how I would approach it. Patterns can be really interesting too. So if you remember textures and patterns, those can be a really fun way to embellish a game board and then use really fun poppy colors. So once you got your 4 sketches, you're going to pick one that you like the best, and we're going to flip the paper over and we're going to do that sketch larger. And you'll be graded 1 point on each smaller sketch, and you get your 5th point, which is the hardest one to get, for doing the large sketch. And again, we want it in color. It's a chance to work out your design, draw things a little bit bigger. I realize, of course, that once you get started, things can change. Maybe the colors will change, or you'll put more text or more patterns or more thought into it, or you'll completely start over. But the process of sketching and planning is useful for creativity. So that's why we're asking you to do it. When you're all done with your 5 sketches, whatever sketches you decide to do, make sure you photograph both sides and submit those.